The sun never seemed to rest in the village of Kanja. It beat down on the clay roofs, turning the huts into ovens and the ground into a blanket of thirst. Dust ruled everything. It clung to people's clothes, lined their throats, and choked even the rivers that once flowed freely. The people of Kanja had long learned to bow to the dust, to live with it, and to find pride in surviving its harshness. At the center of this sunburned world stood a towering house made of red stone and dry palm leaves. It belonged to the Oduma clan, a family known for their wealth, their arrogance, and their strange customs. They wore golden robes stitched with cowrie shells and carried fans made from peacock feathers. Though no peacocks had ever lived in the village, the Odumas were respected and feared in equal measure. And under their roof lived a girl named Tama. Tama had once lived at the far edge of the village with her parents. They were simple weavers, gentle people who spent their days bending threads into stories and selling them for handfuls of grain. But a fever swept through the land one rainy season, stealing breath from the poor and leaving their huts silent. Tama was left alone with nothing but the mat she slept on and the shawl her mother had woven before she died. The Odumas, with their long fingers and longer noses, came to the funeral fire and offered to take her in. The elders of the village nodded. The Odumas were doing a kind thing, they said. Feeding a child who had no one. Sheltering her. But Tama soon learned that kindness in Kanja was a word covered in dust. Every morning, Tama was the first to rise. Before the sun could yawn, she would fetch water from the cracked well, sweep the compound, and prepare breakfast for the household. But it wasn't just chores that greeted her. No, there was a ritual. A lesson. A humiliation wrapped in tradition. Before any meal, Tama had to kneel at the threshold of the Oduma dining room. She wasn't allowed to enter or serve herself. She wasn't even allowed to speak. She would bow low until her forehead kissed the earth, and then she had to lick the dust before her. Not just once. 3 times. Each time was meant to strip her of something, her pride, her past, her name. The dust humbles all, said Madame Oduma, her voice a honeyed blade. Even the greatest kings return to dust. The other children of the house, plump, spoiled, and sharp-tongued, giggled every time. Look at her tongue, they would cry. She's licking her real mother. Sometimes they sprinkled ash or pepper in the spot she had to lick. No one stopped them. In fact, the elders who visited during meal times watched with silent approval, as if witnessing a holy rite. Tama never cried. Not once. Her eyes had dried the day her mother closed hers. She only bowed and obeyed. She ate the cold leftovers after everyone had left. She drank from the last gourd. She slept on a mat beside the chicken coop. And still she never cried. At night she spoke to the dust. Not with words but with her breath. Lying on the earth, she would blow softly, watching as the dust lifted, danced, and fell again. I do not hate you, she would whisper inside herself. I know you are only what they made you into. One day as she swept the courtyard, an old woman approached the Oduma compound. Her back was bent like a bow, and her hands clutched a wooden staff carved with symbols Tama had never seen. She wore a robe the color of storm clouds and eyes that saw through shadows. The Odumas did not like strangers, especially not strange women. But the old woman did not ask to enter. She only sat at the gate and watched. That night, Tama dreamed of a bowl made of bone and dust floating in the sky. The bowl whispered her name, not servant, not girl, but her real name, the one her mother used to sing into her braids. When she woke, she found a thin trail of dust curling from the gate to her mat, like a finger drawing her forward. The next day the old woman was gone. But the dust in the courtyard felt different. It shimmered faintly under the sun. Tama reached down and touched it. It was cool. Mealtime came. The family gathered. Tama knelt at her usual spot, head bowed, throat dry, ready to perform her role. The children grinned. Madame Oduma raised a brow. Go on, child. Do what we taught you. Tama lowered her face. Her tongue reached for the earth. But the dust moved. It rose not like smoke or mist, but like a wall. It did not rise high, only enough to meet her lips. She blinked. The dust vibrated against her skin, humming a tune she didn't recognize but her bones remembered. It whispered again, not today. A hush fell across the compound. What are you doing? Barked Master Oduma. Kneel properly. Tama tried. She pressed her hands to the ground. But her body would not move lower. The dust under her knees hardened like stone, lifting her slightly, refusing to let her bend. Madame Oduma stood up, furious. She's mocking us. Kneel now, you ungrateful thing. Tama looked up. The dust danced around her now, a swirling ring that shimmered like glass in the sun. She wasn't speaking. The dust was speaking through her. You asked me to eat the earth. And now the earth has chosen to speak. The elders gasped. The children stopped laughing. One of them tried to mock her, tossing a handful of flour into the dust ring. It turned to mud mid-air and splattered across the boy's face, blinding him. He screamed. "The gods are angry," someone shouted. But Tama's voice remained calm, though she hadn't opened her lips. The dust did the talking now. "For every grain you forced into my mouth, a truth has been buried. For every laugh you shared, a shadow has grown." The Odumas trembled. The ground began to shake, not much but just enough to rattle the plates and make the dust spiral like a snake. From the gate, the old woman reappeared, her robe flapping even without wind. "She has been tested," the woman said, "and the dust has chosen her." The villagers gathered now, peeking over fences, whispering tales of spirits and rebellion. Many had watched Tama suffer for years. They pitied her in silence. But now they saw her as something else, not a servant but a vessel. Tama stood. Her knees did not ache. Her back was straight. Her tongue tasted of rain. "I am not here to rule," she said, finally speaking with her own voice. "But I will never kneel to cruelty again." The old woman nodded. "Come, child." And Tama followed her through the gate. Behind them, the Odumas compound began to crumble, not all at once but piece by piece. The pillars cracked. The peacock fans caught fire. The golden robes dulled to dust. And in the dining room, the bowl Tama once ate from split in two. That night, Tama sat at the edge of the village watching the stars. The dust curled around her feet like a loyal dog. From then on, the children of Kanja were taught a new story, not one of obedience but of honor. Of a girl who was forced to eat the earth, and who became its voice. They say the dust still listens to her, and that when someone is wronged, they need only whisper her name into the wind. And sometimes in the driest seasons, the dust will rise in silent protest, refusing to let anyone kneel. The drought came without warning. One day the skies simply stopped weeping. The clouds drifted like dry cotton and the winds carried only heat and silence. The river receded. The leaves curled inward. Cracks began to stretch through the fields, long and jagged like the mouths of sleeping beasts. But the granaries, tall and proud at the heart of the village, stood untouched, doors shut, bolts firm, guards doubled. Tama still licked the dust before every meal. She would kneel in front of the hut, back bent, and lower her face to the ground until her tongue met the earth. The dust was drier now, finer. It stung her lips, stuck to her throat, clung to the sweat of her skin. Only after this ritual humiliation would they toss her scraps, chewed bones, old yam skins, or sometimes just the water that boiled the chief's stew. The other children, their ribs pressing like fingers through skin, still found breath to laugh. "Look at her," they'd whisper. "Licking like a goat." The elders only nodded. "Humility," they muttered. "Obedience." They said this while their own mouths were stained with the oils of meat Tama could only smell. The clan matriarch, old Maba, claimed the drought was punishment for youthful pride. "We must humble ourselves before the ancestors," she declared from her shaded porch. "Even the lowest among us must learn silence." Her gaze always landed on Tama then, her smile tight and dry as twine. But Tama never cried. She licked the dust. She took the scraps. And when the stars rose and sleep dared approach, she lay on her mat and whispered not to the gods, nor to her dead parents but to the dust. "How long," she would murmur, her lips brushing the ground, "how long will you let them do this to me?" The dust at first did not answer. But it shifted. She began to notice. At dawn, where she had last spoken, her palm would find a small dent in the earth, like something had pressed there in the night. Her footprints, once erased easily by the wind, began to linger longer than they should. Sometimes, as she swept the courtyards with her woven broom, the dust swirled in patterns she hadn't made. No one else noticed. But she did. And she kept whispering. The village grew thinner. The children's laughter became whimpers. The elders stopped nodding and started arguing. Still, the granaries remained shut, their fat bellies sealed with iron locks and heavy curses. It was said that only the blood of the clan could open them, that the grain inside had been blessed by the great ancestors, and must not be touched until the clan head gave word. But the clan head had not been seen in days. Rumor said he had hidden himself in the coolest room of his house, sick from overeating while others starved. And Tama still licked the dust. One afternoon, as the sun pressed down like a curse, Tama was made to kneel again. Her knees, already bruised, cracked open slightly. A thin line of blood marked the earth. She bent low. Her tongue touched the dust. This time it moved. Not much. Just enough to stir beneath her mouth, like a breath taken in. She froze. The others did not see. They turned and walked away, their tasks complete, their cruelty spent. Tama sat up slowly, blood drying on her knees. She looked at the dust. And it looked back. That night she could not sleep. The dust was louder now. It didn't speak like people did, not with words. It pulsed in dreams. In her mind she saw grains, not of wheat but of memory, spinning in the air. She saw a house of clay collapse and rebuild itself. She saw a woman walk backward into the earth, and the earth swallow her lovingly. She woke before dawn and tiptoed from her mat. The world was still. The wind had stopped. Even the insects were silent. She crept to the granaries. There were 3 of them, thick-walled and ancient. Each door carved with the marks of protection, old script only the elders could read. They loomed like sleeping giants, and Tama, small and dusty, stood before them with no key, no blood right, no power. But she had the dust. She knelt as she always did. But this time not in submission. She pressed her hand to the earth and whispered, not with desperation but with promise. I will never ask to eat first. I only ask you to remember. The dust stirred. A wind rose, not from the sky but from the ground. It lifted in swirls around her, not chaotic but purposeful. The carvings on the granary doors began to shimmer faintly. One by one the bolts creaked. The guards, sleeping in the shadows, began to stir. But their eyes fluttered closed again. Their spears slid from their hands. The dust curled into their ears and lulled them deeper. The first door opened. It made no noise. It simply widened like an eye blinking open. Inside were bags, hefty, swollen with millet and maize. Tama stepped back. She did not touch a single one. Instead she turned and walked through the village. At each house she stopped. She pressed her hand to the wall, to the earth, to the doors. The dust followed her, clinging to her skin, painting her feet. The people woke one by one. First a boy, then an old woman, then 2 mothers. Each time they rubbed their eyes and saw Tama standing there, dust swirling around her ankles, they felt something shift. Hunger faded. Fear retreated. A few villagers followed her, unsure why. They watched as she led them to the granary. When they saw the door open, they expected a curse, a death, a punishment. But nothing came. Instead, the dust whispered. They heard it, faintly, in the wind that blew from inside the granary. It said nothing cruel. It did not shout. It merely said, enough. By sunrise, the entire village stood before the granaries. The guards could not explain why they slept. The clan elders could not explain why the seals had opened. The matriarch tried to speak, but her tongue felt thick as if dust had clogged her throat. And Tama stood silent. The villagers began to move. Slowly. Not like looters, not like thieves. Like mourners in a sacred place. They took only what they needed. 1 bowl each. 1 handful for the weak, 2 for the children. Tama took none. The matriarch approached her later that day, leaning heavily on her staff. What did you do? She asked, eyes narrowed, voice dry. Tama looked up, her eyes unreadable. I asked the dust how long it would let you do this to me, she said. And? It said long enough. The matriarch shivered. She turned and left without another word. From that day on, no one made Tama lick the dust. She still knelt sometimes, but only to plant seeds where the cracks had begun to close. And when the rains returned, sudden and warm, the dust rose not in defiance but in dance. It coated the children's feet as they played. It dusted the rooftops like a blessing. And whenever someone tried to speak cruelty into the wind, the dust found their mouth and silenced them. And Tama? She never ruled. She never shouted. But when she walked through the village, even the proudest elders bowed their heads. Not to her. To the dust that followed. Under a sharp moon and a sky heavy with silence, the feast began. The clan's matriarch, draped in red silks and gold bangles, declared it a celebration of endurance during the drought. Baskets overflowed with preserved meats and hidden harvests meant only for the elite. The villagers watched from afar with sunken eyes. Tama, still tending the outer courtyard, did not hear the bell that summoned the servants inside. Her fingers were raw from sweeping the compound, her knees dark from dust. She was late. The matriarch's eyes narrowed when Tama finally stepped into the feast. No explanation was asked. No voice was raised. A single finger pointed toward the stained earth near the roasting pit where a goat had been slaughtered earlier in the day. The blood had dried into the dust, rusty and dark. Tama froze, her lips trembling for the first time in moons. Lick it, the matriarch said, voice like cracked porcelain. The other servants turned away, some biting their lips. The elders remained silent. The children, ever eager to please cruelty, giggled under their breath. Tama moved forward on her knees, her stomach twisting not just from hunger, but from the iron stench rising from that patch of ground. Her tongue met the dust. It was thick. It clung to her mouth like ash, and the metallic tang of old blood seared her throat. It was not like the dry dust she had tasted every day before. This was something different, heavier, as if it remembered pain. Tama swallowed. That night, the taste would not leave her. No amount of water soothed it. The metallic flavor seemed to multiply, curling behind her teeth and seeping into her dreams. She slept on a mat beside the ash pit. Her body twitched with fever, and her mind opened like a cracked pot. The dust rose around her in her dreams, but it was no longer dry. It swirled in red spirals, painting the air with the shape of storms. Faces formed in the storm. Old women with open mouths, goats with human eyes, and a great matron figure whose hands poured dust from her robes like rivers. In her dream, the voice was not heard but felt. It said nothing Tama could write down, only pressed into her with meaning. When she awoke, her lips were stained dark. Her mat had blown away in the night wind. She rose slowly, trembling as though she'd walked through fire. She returned to the courtyard, drawn to the same patch of ground. But it was gone. The bloody dust was missing. Not swept. Not scraped. Vanished. The soil had sunk or the earth had drunk it. All that remained was a smooth circle of cracked ground, as if it had swallowed the memory of violence whole. The other servants noticed, but no one said a word. One girl whispered a prayer. Another crossed herself. From that day forward, Tama stopped flinching. The dust no longer tasted like dust. It tasted like warning, like stories, like rage. And she knew the ground was listening. The morning was pale and dry, the kind of morning where even the light seemed thirsty. Tama awoke before the rooster's call, as she always did. Her mat was woven too thin to cushion her bones, but she didn't complain. There was still breath in her lungs, and that was enough for another day. She walked past the elder women's hut where the smoke from the cooking fires drifted low and slow. As always, the same routine awaited her. Draw water, sweep the courtyard, and then, before breakfast, kneel and press her tongue to the dust. The act was older than her memory. They said it was tradition. They said it humbled the soul. But it had always tasted like shame. She entered the courtyard quietly, her feet bare on the dry earth. Around her, the children snickered behind hands. The matriarch's sons leaned lazily on carved stools, their eyes already sharp with mockery. Tama bowed her head. The dust lay before her like a silent judge. Coarse, brown, bitter dust. It waited. She moved to kneel. But her knees didn't bend. Confused, Tama tried again. The muscles obeyed, but the moment her skin neared the earth, a small puff of wind stirred the dust. It rose, not in a flurry but as a slow ripple like breath. Her knees hesitated in the air. Something resisted her, a soft push against her bones, like a mother's hand gently saying no. The watchers laughed, thinking she was pretending. "Bow properly, servant," barked one of the matriarch's sons. Tama forced herself down again, harder this time. But as her knees touched the surface, the earth itself shivered. Not an earthquake. Not a stomp. But the dust recoiled from her like it was alive. A second ripple spread, unsettling the entire courtyard. The men stood. The children stopped laughing. Tama fell backward onto her hands, heart thudding. She glanced around. Nobody moved to help. She looked down at the patch of ground. It had smoothed itself out. Like nothing had happened. "Again," growled the eldest son. She obeyed. But again the dust pushed back. This time not just where she knelt, but in a ring around her. A strange draft curled upward from the ground, lifting small threads of dust into the air like dancers. The children screamed. One of the elder women gasped. The matriarch emerged from her hut, her face stern as carved stone. She looked at Tama, then at the dust. "What sorcery is this?" she hissed. Tama could not answer. Her lips trembled. Her hands were smudged with earth. I didn't do it." The matriarch stepped forward, staff in hand. "Then do it again. If you are not cursed." Tama stood slowly. Her knees felt stiff, not from fear but from something deeper. She stepped forward and tried again, bowing before the dust. It parted. Right before her lips touched it, the ground hissed, a soft sighing sound like wind inside a shell, and the dust shifted backward, curling around her face but never letting her reach it. Then came a gust of wind, indoors. The flame in the clay lamp flickered. The roof rustled. Someone screamed. "The dust moved," said a child. "It moved on its own." "Witchcraft," muttered one of the elders. "No," said another. "It's a sign." Tama stumbled back and ran. That evening no one spoke to her. She was given no supper. But she didn't mind. Her stomach didn't growl like before. It was as though the dust had fed her something strange and thick, something invisible. That night, as the sky blushed with sunset, dust began to rise in places it never should. A girl screamed when it burst from beneath her bed in spirals. A mourning widow found a fine layer of it inside her stew pot. A man lifted the lid of his grain bin to find it coated with dust, though it had been sealed tight for weeks. The elders held a midnight meeting. They burned herbs. They prayed. They blamed the drought. They blamed the ancestors. They even whispered Tama's name, but no one dared say it too loud. Tama sat in her hut, staring at the floor. A shallow bowl of water sat beside her, untouched. She reached down and touched the floor. Dust curled around her fingertips. She whispered, "Why now?" The dust quivered. Just once. In the morning, a new ritual was tried. The matriarch ordered that no one should kneel. Instead, everyone would stand still before the courtyard and offer silence. But the dust rose again, circling their ankles like snakes. Some began to weep. "The ancestors are angry," said one elder. "We forced too many to the ground. Too many have licked pain for the comfort of the few. They must be silenced," the matriarch snapped. But silencing no longer worked. That night, the dust covered her doorstep, thick like a warning. It moved in deliberate patterns. Not scattered, not random, but shaped. Some said they saw letters. Others said it looked like bones. And always the same story spread. Tama tried to kneel, but the ground wouldn't let her. At the well, women refused to speak to her, yet they drew her water and left it nearby. At the market, children wouldn't make fun, but they watched her with wide eyes, then mimicked her steps in secret, hoping to see the dust rise again. The day after, at dawn, Tama went to the courtyard again. No one was there. She stood where the dust had once shamed her and waited. It did not move. Instead, it cleared itself, like a hand wiping away dirt from glass. Tama crouched gently this time, not to obey but to see. A single sentence was etched into the dirt. "The one who bore silence shall never kneel again." She covered it with her shawl and walked away. In the coming days, others came to the courtyard and found dust rising at their feet. Not violently but as if greeting them. Old men who had once spat on Tama lowered their heads in apology. The matriarch's sons avoided the courtyard altogether. The matriarch herself grew ill. She accused Tama of curses, of spells, of making the wind speak. But the wind didn't answer her anymore. Only the dust did, and it refused to kneel. Not for her. Not for anyone. And for the first time neither did Tama. The matriarch summoned the elders at dawn, her voice shrill with command. The dust in the village had stirred uninvited, whispered unspoken things and moved without permission. Such behavior was not natural, it was a curse, she claimed. Something born of rebellion. Something brought forth by the servants' silent resentment. And so she announced a cleansing. The sun had barely climbed when the summons echoed through the huts. All servants, young, old, weak or ill, were to gather in the center of the village square. There they were ordered to remove their sandals, their feet bare before the watching eyes of the clan. Gravel, sharp and dry, had been spread across the ground in twisted patterns like cruel stars. It sparkled beneath the morning light, a bed of pain prepared for penance. Tama stood among them, her eyes lowered, heart unmoved. Her companions trembled, the old cook whimpered under his breath, a girl beside Tama clutched her toes. Some whispered prayers, others swallowed fear. None dared disobey. The guards stood with spears angled downward, their tips brushing the stone like warnings. The ritual began. One by one, the servants were commanded to walk the spiral path of gravel. Each step left blood behind. Shards bit deep into soles. Screams were swallowed by silence. The elders watched from their seats, nodding with cold approval. Pain, they said, purged rebellion. Blood taught gratitude. When Tama's turn came, the air shifted. She stepped forward, her chin lifted not in defiance but in calm surrender. The gravel looked hungry, waiting to taste her flesh. But as she placed her first foot down, something strange happened. The stones trembled. A subtle vibration, almost invisible, ran beneath them. She walked. Step after step, her bare feet pressed into the gravel, but no blood came. No cuts. No bruises. The stones that had sliced others' flesh flattened beneath her touch. They rearranged subtly, becoming smooth, warm, almost soft. Gasps rose around her. The matriarch narrowed her eyes. By the time Tama completed the spiral, she stood unbroken. Not a drop of blood stained her feet. The other servants looked at her with awe, and some with fear. The matriarch rose, her voice shaking with fury. Trickery? The girl carries something foul. The dust listens to her. But no one answered. That night the winds were quiet. Yet something stirred beneath the huts. Tama sat in her corner of the servants' quarters, her eyes wide open in the dark. Her feet tingled, not in pain but with something deeper. A humming. A knowing. And then it began. Cracks appeared in the floors of the clan's huts. Not small ones but wide, jagged, purposeful. They weren't random. They weren't accidents. They formed shapes, human shapes. Long curves of heels, the round press of toes, the firm defiance of arches. Feet. Dozens of them. All pointing in the same direction. All upright. All standing. No one slept that night. Elders screamed. The matriarch ordered the cracks sealed. Workers poured clay and ash into the gaps, but the moment it dried, the cracks returned. Sometimes larger. Sometimes in different huts. Children cried that they heard footsteps where none had walked. Dogs barked at the walls. Fires flickered and died without cause. And in the servants' quarters, the dust gathered near Tama's mat, curling like fingers reaching upward. A whisper came again. You have licked us long enough. Now we rise. Tama closed her eyes. She remembered the years of humiliation, the laughter of those who watched her eat dust, the sting of stone on her knees, the hunger, the silence. All of it had filled the ground. The pain she swallowed had soaked into the floor. Now the dust no longer lay still. Remembered? It had shaped itself into cracked feet, not broken but resistant. The next morning, the villagers stepped out of their homes and saw the marks in every direction. The feet carved in stone, in earth, in the air around them. A message repeated again and again without sound. We will not kneel. And Tama, barefoot still, walked among them untouched. Her shadow long and sure. Her feet leaving no prints, only silence. The drums beat louder than ever before. Colorful fabrics swayed in rhythm as villagers twirled and stomped, their joy rising high with each thud of the dancers' feet. It was the harvest celebration, though there had been no harvest. The granaries remained shut, yet the clan had summoned what little was left from their private reserves to display abundance. Platters of food, roasted fowl, yam, honeyed plantains, and thick millet porridge, were laid out in the central square. Children danced with hollow cheeks. Elders forced smiles with cracked lips. Hunger hid behind painted faces and rituals. Tama stood at the edge in her usual brown cloth, the hem dust-stained from years of kneeling. She had not been invited, but the servants were ordered to watch and clap. Behind her eyes the storm still brewed, red, silent, patient. The dust beneath her toes seemed thicker today, as if it knew something no one else did. She felt it move when the drums beat. The matriarch, seated on a carved wooden throne, raised her hands. The music stopped. Let the feast begin, she declared. Her voice cracked like dry bark. She looked toward the sky, pretending the clouds weren't gone. A boy reached for a dumpling. A woman raised her calabash of palm wine. A girl giggled as she leaned forward to taste a honeyed date. But then it happened. A thin swirl of dust lifted itself from the ground. It danced upward, curling like a ribbon, and dropped onto the food. One dish. Then another. Then 10. Then all. Gasps filled the square as every platter, each grain, each piece of meat, every cup, was suddenly cloaked in dust. Not the normal kind, not the dry skin of the earth. This dust moved. It slid, pulsed, and twisted. It had a breath. It had a hunger. A man coughed violently as he inhaled it. Another tried to wave it off, but it clung to his arms like thorns. One woman screamed as the dust entered her mouth, muffling her cries. The matriarch stood and shouted, "This is sorcery. Find the one who brought this shame." People scrambled. Feet stomped. A servant dropped to her knees and wailed, her hands red from slapping the ground. Children were pulled behind cloaks. The chief rushed forward, lifting his long ceremonial staff, and stomped on the closest dust pile, trying to smother it. The dust did not flee. It rose around his ankles like smoke, then turned black and clung to his skin. A searing sound filled the air like meat sizzling over fire. He screamed, dropping the staff. The matriarch ordered guards to sweep the dust away, to bury the feast, to punish whoever was behind it. Tama did not move. She stood barefoot, silent. The dust parted around her feet like respectful water. It did not climb her. It did not choke her. It recognized her. Eyes turned to her. "Did you do this?" barked the matriarch, stepping forward with cracked sawls and a trembling chin. "Did your cursed mouth summon this?" Tama's eyes were calm. She had not spoken for years, not out loud. The habit of silence had grown into her like a second skin. But now her lips parted, her voice dry yet clear, rough as sand against stone. "I licked your dust," she said slowly. "Now it licks you back." A wave of murmurs ran through the crowd. Her voice struck them like thunder in a place that had forgotten rain. "Blasphemy," one elder spat. "She mocks the clan." "She's possessed," another whispered. But none dared step closer. The dust thickened in the air now, forming slow spirals that hovered above the feast, like silent guards or vengeful spirits. The dishes crumbled beneath it, chicken wings turning to bone, porridge dissolving into gritty ash. No one could eat. No one dared. Tama looked to the ground and whispered something. No one heard the words, but the dust seemed to pause, listening. Then it slowly began to recede, swirling away from the dishes and gathering at the center of the square. There it formed a low mound shaped like a tongue. Gasps turned to silence. The matriarch took a step back. Her foot cracked the edge of the feast plate. She slipped slightly, but no one offered a hand. She stared at Tama as though seeing her for the first time. "I obeyed," Tama said, her voice firmer. "Even when it hurt. Even when no one saw. The ground remembers." Somewhere, a baby began to cry. Somewhere else, someone knelt, not in obedience but in fear. Tama turned and walked away. No one followed. The dust trailed behind her, like a shadow that had waited too long to be seen. That night, no one feasted. The platters were thrown away, the pots broken. Hunger returned stronger, heavier. But no one dared command Tama again. The dust had chosen. The sky darkened without warning. What began as a distant haze soon thickened into a wall of storm rolling toward the village. Children ran indoors. Goats bleated and scattered. Roofs rattled under the sudden gusts, and dust, more than the village had seen in decades, surged in waves, blinding eyes, choking mouths, seeping into cracks like a living thing. Tama stood at the heart of it. Her thin frame was unmoved by the storm. While others fled and shut their doors, she lifted her head, eyes closed, as if the dust itself were speaking to her. Around her, the dust danced, not attacking her, but circling, cradling. Her bare feet sank slightly into the ground as if the earth wanted her deeper, rooted. From within the thickest cloud, a figure emerged. At first, no one noticed. All eyes were on their homes, their cooking fires, their frantic prayers. But then a cry came from one of the huts near the northern edge. "Someone is walking through the storm." An old man approached, tall and thin, robes whipping in the wind. His eyes were pale, clouded, blind. But his steps were precise, confident, as though the storm guided him rather than hindered him. A long carved staff tapped the ground with each step, and the dust parted for him. The villagers gathered hesitantly, watching through door cracks and window slits. The matriarch stood firm at the front of the great hut, her face wrapped in cloth, her feet buried in warm ash to protect against the storm's wrath. Her voice rose above the wind. "Who comes uninvited into our land?" The old man did not stop walking. He came to stand before Tama and rested one hand on her shoulder. "I am not uninvited," he said softly. "The dust called me." His voice was cracked and dry, like sun-baked earth, yet it carried with surprising strength. The villagers stepped closer, eyes wide. "She carries the memory of the ground," he continued, gesturing toward Tama. "Dust does not forget knees forced down. It does not forget the tongues pressed to it in pain, or the voices silenced by the weight of others. She remembers. So the dust remembers. And now it answers." Tama remained silent. But the air around her shifted again as if in agreement. The matriarch scoffed, though her feet twitched uneasily beneath her. "We are being punished," she spat, "because of this girl's insolence. She has poisoned the dust with her hatred." "No," said the old man. "She is its mouth, its memory, and its future." The matriarch stepped forward, flanked by guards. "She will be exiled," she declared. "Tonight she walks into the desert. Let her whispers stay with the dust. We will rebuild what she has broken." The elder turned his head toward her voice. Though his eyes were sightless, it felt as though he saw straight through her. "You cannot exile what the earth has embraced," he said. "You cannot cast out what the wind carries. Try and you will only bury yourselves." But the matriarch waved her hand, signaling the guards forward. Two of them stepped toward Tama, spears in hand, dust clinging to their sandals. As they reached for her, a scream rose, not from any throat but from the dust itself. The wind shrieked, sharp and sudden. A cloud burst between the guards and Tama, knocking them backward. Their hands bled with shallow cuts. Their mouths filled with soil. A path opened behind Tama, leading outward toward the village gates. But every time the matriarch barked in order to push her out, the dust closed in again. "No path will take her from here," said the old man calmly. "She is not meant to flee. She is meant to stay. To rise." The villagers murmured. Some looked at Tama with fear, others with awe, and a few with shame. One woman stepped forward, a former servant who once knelt beside Tama years ago. "I remember when we were children," she said. "Tama shared her water when mine was taken. She helped my mother when she was too weak to carry firewood. And we let her lick dust alone. We all watched. We all let her suffer." She fell to her knees, but the dust beneath her surged, catching her softly, not letting her fully kneel. "I want to stand beside her now." One by one, others stepped forward. Not many, just a handful. But enough. The matriarch, seeing her grip slipping, raised her staff and shouted a final curse toward the sky. "Then may dust take all of you." It did not answer her. Instead, it turned toward her hut. The largest one. The most decorated. The center of her power. And with a deep groan, the earth beneath it cracked. A wave of dust erupted through its floor, lifting mats, bowls, sacred relics. The walls began to sag. She fled as it collapsed behind her, coughing, tripping, her voice lost in the rising howl. The old man turned to Tama. "What you started in silence," he said, "now moves in storm." Tama nodded slowly. And for the first time she smiled, not as a servant. Not as a girl who once licked the dust. But as one who had become part of the land. And part of its reckoning. Under the cover of darkness, the elders gather in secret. They speak in hushed tones, voices laced with fear. Tama is no longer just a girl. They whisper she's become something else, something dangerous. They recall the matriarch's humiliation, the storm's strange voices, and the dust that won't settle no matter how many times they sweep. "This is rebellion," one says. "A spirit has entered her," another mutters. They agree that Tama must be removed, for the sake of the village's peace, for tradition, for control. That night, they slip through shadows toward her hut, knives wrapped in cloth, faces hidden behind ash. But the ground betrays them. As they approach, a tremor ripples beneath their feet. A breeze kicks up, soft at first, then sharp like a hiss. Dust begins to swirl in thin ribbons around their ankles. One elder halts. "Did you hear that?" he says. But the others press on, determined. Inside, Tama lies awake. She has not slept since the matriarch tried to send her away. Her ears have grown attuned to the earth's voice, and tonight it hums louder than ever. She feels it rise in her bones like a call to stand, again, always again. When the elders draw near, the dust outside her door lifts like a breath held too long. Suddenly, the wind explodes into a spiral, hurling sharp grains like knives through the air. The elders stagger back, blinded, choking. One screams as his eyes fill with grit. Another falls, clutching his chest. The knives in their hands clatter uselessly to the ground. Around them, the dust dances in furious circles, forming shapes, knees stiff, backs upright, hands reaching toward the sky. The hut remains untouched, still and silent. Tama steps out slowly, barefoot, her eyes glowing with a calm fury. The dust parts for her like a sea of memory. The rest of the village wakes to the storm's roar. Children peek from doorways. Servants huddle in fear, then wonder. They see the elders crawling on their hands and knees, faces scraped, eyes shut against the storm. No one helps them. Instead, whispers spread. The dust protects her. The dust remembers. The elders cry out for forgiveness, but the wind carries their pleas away. Tama says nothing. She watches them struggle the same way they once watched her lick bloody dust in shame. By morning, the dust has stilled, but the village is changed. Every home has a fresh line of dust by its doorstep, neat, deliberate, shaped like legs bent in mock kneeling, then suddenly rising. The symbolism is clear. The earth refuses submission. The children draw in the dust, their small fingers tracing messages of defiance. Servants walk with heads high. No one kneels to greet the elders anymore. The matriarch calls a meeting, but only a handful attend. Her voice cracks as she demands loyalty, demands obedience. The people remain quiet. Their eyes drift toward Tama, who stands at the village's edge with dust swirling gently around her feet. The silence grows heavy. Then a child, no older than 6, walks forward and places their palm flat on the earth. The dust rises in a spiral again, soft and slow. The people gasp. It is a sign. Another child follows. Then another. Soon, a line of children and servants forms, all with palms to the dust, heads unbowed. The wind picks up again, not violent but steady like a drumbeat. The elders retreat. Their power dissolves like footprints in wind. The matriarch stares at Tama, a mix of hatred and fear in her eyes. But she knows it's over. She cannot beat dust with rules. She cannot shame the earth into silence. Not anymore. Tama turns away, walking past the hut where she once licked blood from the ground. She doesn't look back. Behind her, the people begin to sweep the dust into shapes, symbols of standing, of memory, of voice. No one tells them to. It is instinct now. An uprising written in grains. The dust refuses to settle because settling would mean forgetting. And forgetting would mean kneeling again. Tama woke beneath the open sky, the stars blinking above like unfamiliar eyes. She was lying on soft earth beyond the village borders, just past the trees where the wind ran wild and free. Her body was whole. No bruises. No cuts. No burns from the spiraling dust storm the elders had summoned with their violence. Her breath came slow but strong, as if the wind itself had guarded her lungs through the night. When she sat up, the ground beneath her pulsed, not with danger but with something alive. A steady thrum beneath the soil, like a heart waking after long sleep. She placed her hand on the earth. It was warm, not from the sun but from something older. Something listening. She rose slowly, testing her legs. They held her firmly, stronger than before. As she walked, the dust beneath her feet stirred gently, not in protest but in greeting. Each step she took was mirrored by a faint lift of dust behind her, like invisible footsteps following, learning to walk again after centuries of kneeling. By midday, word of her survival had reached the village. First, it was a servant boy who dared whisper, "Tama lives." Then, a girl who had watched from her hiding place said, "She walked away, and the dust walked with her." These murmurs turned to a chorus. The village could no longer pretend she was gone. The matriarch, old and angry, sat in the chief's hut, scratching her cracked palms and spitting orders. But no one obeyed. The servants had started leaving, not in crowds but one by one, quietly stepping out through the village paths, barefoot and unafraid. They walked toward the soft hills, toward the scent of wind and the sound of freedom, seeking the girl who had made the dust remember. Back where Tama walked, she did not look behind her. She didn't need to. She could feel them coming. Each footstep of those who followed caused the dust to stir, as if the ground itself welcomed them. She found a clearing near a great tree with roots that twisted like fingers through the soil. There she sat and placed her hand once more on the earth. "Are you listening?" she whispered. The dust curled up gently from the ground and danced around her fingers like a reply. Far behind, the matriarch stood alone in the village square. The chief had locked himself in his hut days ago, too afraid to face the dust. The elders no longer gathered. Their eyes were still blinded from the storm. The servants were gone. Even the children had stopped playing. All that remained was silence, and the ever-present dust, thickening in corners, layering on food, creeping through clothes, whispering in voices only she could hear now. She tried to sweep. She tried to scrub the earth clean. But every time her knees touched the ground, it buckled. Her skin cracked. Her mouth filled with grit. She shouted at the wind. She screamed at the dust. But no one answered. And then one night, the wind came howling down from the hills, carrying laughter and footsteps, carrying voices she had once silenced. The matriarch stood in the doorway, wrapped in her finest cloth, demanding the dust obey her. "I am your elder," she cried. "I am your blood." But the wind replied, scattering her words like ash. "The ground remembers your cruelty," it seemed to say, "and it will not kneel again." Some say the matriarch was last seen wandering beyond the village, choking on dust and begging the wind to take back its voice. Others say she sank into the earth, swallowed by the very ground she once used to humiliate others. Tama, meanwhile, stood by the great tree, her hair braided with wind, her feet bare and unbroken. Around her, a small circle of those who had followed began to gather. They did not kneel. They sat, stood, or danced. They listened to the earth. And sometimes they heard the dust speak back. The land around them grew rich and soft. Water pooled without warning. Fruits ripened early. No one shouted. No one bled for someone else's pride. The ground at last had risen, not to punish but to remind, that it had always been watching. And that even the smallest speck of dust, when remembered, could move mountains.